All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brooks Rayford. I'm president of the North Carolina Technology Association, or NC Tech. I want to welcome you to this Q1 NC Tech Leadership Poll briefing. As I mentioned, the North Carolina Tech Association is the host of this event today, but also conducted a series of polls over the last couple of years that were designed to get a sense of sentiment on the part of leaders within the tech community in North Carolina during the launch of and the continuation of COVID and its impact on the economy and people's behaviors, our own businesses, our customers' businesses, and so forth. And so in 2020, the polling was done starting around the beginning of April. We did 2 polls per month in April, May, and June. It was interesting to see the shift in sentiment over time because early in April, people thought that this thing would be over with fairly soon, maybe by that summer. And so there were a lot of broad consensus on estimates as to when things would get back to some degree of normal. Of course, as time went on, people's projections of that got much longer. There were some pretty immediate impacts on hiring, layoffs, business impact, et cetera, et cetera. And so that polling generated a great deal of interest in the media, among our members, and so forth. And so again, in 2021, we did another round of polling in the summer. And at that time, we found that the feedback was a bit more optimistic. We had been into COVID for more than a year. Frankly, some in the tech sector in particular did pretty well, did okay. Not everybody, but it was a higher percentage probably than a lot of sectors would have experienced. And it was also about the time that the Delta variant was fading before Omicron raised its head. And so there was real optimism about coming back in person, back to office or some form of that, travel again and so forth. Our own association began hosting some in-person meetings last summer and early fall, as I know many of you did. But the polling was still, again, interesting to everybody. We got a lot of good attention for it and coverage for it. And so as we planned for 2022, we decided that COVID is not going to be around in the same fashion it has been forever. However, the interest in business sentiment around impact on business, how's business doing, how's it been going, how do you think it's going to go for your own business, for the state's tech sector generally, hiring trends and appetite for continued hiring, those sorts of things would be questions that would be worth asking on a regular basis going forward. And then we could weave in questions that were timely, might be of particular interest because of where we were in the year and what was going on at that time. And those questions may come or go as time moves along. So our partner for the past year or two on these polls has been NC Tech member firm Stearns Financial Group. They signed on again for 2022 to sponsor what will now be a quarterly poll. We'll do one of these sessions after each one and release the information to the press. Before I get into the briefing results for that Q1 poll that was just recently conducted, I'd like to welcome and introduce Dennis Stearns. He's the founder of Stearns Financial Group. He is a nationally recognized wealth manager with $2 billion in managed assets, known as a thought leader in the techno-industrial revolution, and has offices in the Triangle and the Triad. He is founder of the firm. He's a member of the NC Tech Board of Advisors. And Dennis, we'd like to welcome you to say a few words of greeting before we get started.
Yeah, thank you, Brooks. Happy to be part of this. And again, every time we've done one of these surveys, it's sort of like deep sea fishing, and you bring up the nets, and there's some things you kind of expect to see in the nets. And there's usually a few odd sea creatures in there. And I think we've got a few of those this time. So again, I think it's really interesting to see the results, but then talk about the why behind the results.
Absolutely. We'll try to get into some of that. Let me go through some of the mechanics here. First about the poll, who was polled, et cetera, and then about how today will go. The respondent pool consisted of 4 categories of people: members of the NC Tech Board of Directors, members of our Board of Advisors, select tech CEOs who are not on either board, and then also select site leaders who are not on either board. A site leader in our nomenclature is the top North Carolina exec or campus or hub leader for a non-headquartered company that might have a large tech workforce in North Carolina. So this could range from tech companies like IBM and Cisco, Apple, Google, et cetera, to non-tech firms that have a major tech site or campus in our state, like MetLife or Fidelity Investments, Credit Suisse, and so forth. We achieved a nearly 50% response rate. So although this is not a scientific poll, that's a pretty high response rate in polling, and so reflects, we think, a broad representation for the feedback. Our aim was to create a fairly short poll that would have two types of questions, as I noted earlier. One grouping would have general business sentiment questions that we will ask every quarter, and that will give us a sense of trends or shifts in sentiment over time. Things like that are hiring plans, is your business up or down, things like that. The second grouping will be questions that could change from quarter to quarter, depending on what topics are prominent at that time. So for example, in this poll, we asked a bit more about remote work, office space usage, and so on. That may or may not be as pertinent as time moves along. All of those who registered for this web briefing will receive an email by sometime tomorrow with a link to the page on our website where we'll post a video of this session as well as a slide deck of the poll results. We'll also be sending a press release, so you'll likely see some coverage in the media in the coming days. We intend to keep this briefing brief, but we'll try to respond to questions if you have any. Feel free to use the Q&A feature to post any questions that you would like for me to address. Separately, I would encourage everyone to post in the chat. Maybe Emily, you can get us started on that. Your name and affiliation, just to create a connection to the full audience. And also, if you have comments or observations you just want to put out there as we move along, that would be the place for that. I won't be monitoring the chat, but I will be monitoring the Q&A function if you have something you'd like for me to try to address. So now on to the results. The first couple of questions had to do with just getting a sense of what type of organizations were represented among the respondents. So we asked about the number of North Carolina-based employees in your organization. And you can see that there's pretty good range here from very small to mid-size, quite a few on the large side as well. So these are North Carolina employee headcount ranges, and it seems pretty well divided. In case you're wondering about why would we poll someone who has no one in North Carolina, the New York Stock Exchange is a member of our association, and they don't have any employees in North Carolina, but they are on our board. Is your organization headquartered here? This actually reflects our split. We have long said that about 2/3 of our member companies are headquartered in North Carolina, and sure enough, the poll respondents reflect that mix. So that's actually encouraging because it means that demographic is on par with our overall membership. And then for the respondents themselves, what is your role within the organization? Obviously, we targeted leaders here. So you see that the C-suite was over half of the respondents. There were functional leaders in other areas, IT, sales and marketing with a higher 2, and then HR, finance, operations, and other. Now we're getting into some of those sentiment questions that we'll ask every quarter. So how do you perceive the past 12 months for North Carolina's tech sectors? This is a question about the respondents' perception of the overall sector, not just their own business. And obviously it's very positive. Just the good and great combined are 82% or so. Very few, if any, said anything negative. And then a small percentage felt like things were just okay, but overall very positive sentiment. And then looking forward, looking backward, but for your own organization, how do you perceive the past 12 months for your own organization? What's interesting is that the great and good combined are higher than people's perception about the overall sector. So it seems that people feel really good about their own organization. It reminds me of the old joke that everybody hates Congress, but they love their own congressman. So I guess people felt like their own organization has done well, but they weren't quite as sure about the overall sector. Now looking forward, I expect over the next 12 months, our business will, and clearly very strong positive here, almost 84% say they expect their business will grow. A smaller percentage say stay the same. Very few say decline. This pandemic has impacted businesses in many ways. Please rate the following as it applies to your organization. If you look across the bottom, you'll see the items that the respondents were asked to rate, and the column above shows the spread of answers. So the dark blue is the strongest positive, and it works down from there. So focused more on new products in terms of how the pandemic has impacted you. You'll see that there's a pretty strong positive response to that, but quite a few were neither positive nor negative about that. Focus more on client services, that gets even a higher positive response rate. Focus more on employee retention, even stronger. Focus more on employee health and safety, the strongest answer of any of the questions here. Expanded ability, employee ability to work remotely, very strong positive there.
Yeah, Brooks, I'm sorry, that was the one that actually floored me a little bit, is if you don't already have things at a great level for employee ability to work remotely, why are 63% expanding it? And so that one would be a good one to unpack.
Well, it may be that because the way it's phrased, it sounds past tense, people might have assumed that they've done it already. But yes, you're right. I think clearly we're in some transition with how all that's going to work and play out. And a future question gets to that a little bit.
Yeah.
Expanded employee ability to set own schedule, pretty strong, not as strong as the previous couple. Increased pay and benefits, also overall a majority positive yes. And increased recruitment efforts, very strong yes. And so what you see is the ones that had the strongest positive tend to be ones that were focused on employees and how you manage through all this, attract employees, retain employees, focus on how you can make their work as productive and yet convenient for them as possible. What impact has the economic environment had on your hiring? Very strong positive in the tech sector. As you can see, still hiring is almost 94%. Almost no one was in the negative, and a tiny fraction are in frozen. And this is even stronger than the polling, but similarly strong. It was a very high positive response rate in the last year, at least, when we did some of this same polling. Here's another one of those where we're rating different things. Rate North Carolina's strength for each of the following competitive areas. The first column, technology workforce, there's very strong sentiment that is a competitive advantage for North Carolina. Business climate, similarly, you all see the rankings. We tend to be at or near the top every time one of those national rankings comes out. Cost of doing business, pretty positive there. Quality of life is where North Carolina normally hits it out of the park, and our respondents seem to feel the same way. They feel very good about our technology infrastructure. I was a little surprised that it was this positive. I would have expected the pink to be a little stronger here just because there is so much room to improve, but people still feel pretty good about it. Entrepreneurial support, still fairly favorable. Higher ed assets, this is another example where North Carolinians feel very strong about the strength of higher education. We have three really powerful sectors in North Carolina with the University of North Carolina system, the North Carolina Community College system, and then the several dozen institutions that make up North Carolina's independent colleges and universities. So taken together, we're very fortunate there. And then innovation ecosystem, still pretty positive, but also again, a fairly healthy, neither positive nor negative response to that. So what percentage of your workforce is still remote? We presume that the answers here will include people who have an actual split. This employee is remote, that employee is not. Others will look at the number as it relates to a company that maybe has decided we're not going to have more than 50% or 80% or some percentage on site on any given day, but it may not be the same people every day. So take that into account as you look at these. So all the deciles are here. Clearly, if you start at the top, nearly a quarter of our respondents said their organization is 100% remote. And then another almost a third say that their organization is 90% remote. So if you really take the two or three pink colored ones here, lighter colored ones here, you're getting up close to 75% of our member respondents were saying their organization is around 75 to 100% remote. what are your organization's future office space and facility plans? And what's interesting to me here is that almost 70% say they plan to stay or grow their office space. I don't think most people would have guessed that. Move to fully remote, pretty tiny, actually. And then decreased footprint has a healthy 30%. But I was surprised that the stay the same or add space was so strong. This will be of particular interest to those in the commercial real estate industry. But I will say what I'm hearing a lot from our members is that while they may keep or even expand their space, it won't look the same. And they may not have the same density. They're looking into reconfiguring their space to be more accommodating of flexible use, of people coming in some days of the week and not others, of teams being able to come in, accomplish a project or a task, and then depart. So it'll be interesting to see what that space looks like, but also very interesting that the amount of space seems to be holding steady with a healthy increase group there as well. We asked some open-ended questions just to see what people said without being prompted for choices. And the first one is, what makes you optimistic about the next 12 months? And what you see here are ones that showed up most frequently, some version of these. So the reduction of COVID or getting to endemic phase, both of which would be a good thing in terms of being able to get back to normal activity, vaccination rates improving, supply chain improvements, growth in the tech field, more in-person activity. We hear that a lot from people as it relates to sales interactions being important. Continued demand for talent, customers seem optimistic, and increased announcements. You've seen the big ones, Apple and Google, but there's a lot of other announcements too that together add up to a lot of economic activity. I think last year was a record for job announcements in North Carolina. So this is a flavor of what people are optimistic about. And then we asked the opposite, what concerns you the most? And there's fewer here because what we found was there were about 5 answers that were very common, very consistent. So there seemed to be consensus around the types of things that people have concerns about, whereas there were a lot more different types of things that people were optimistic about. The other funny thing here is some of the items show up on both lists, but for different reasons. So some are optimistic about COVID's development. Others are concerned that it won't go away as fast. Same around the war on talent. The Great Resignation, we had a program on that not too long ago, as a matter of fact, this notion of people just leaving the workforce, or at least leaving where they're working, to go to a place where they have more flexibility or whatever is of interest to them. There's some policy issues here, concern about interest rates, inflation, tax policies, and then strains on systems, strains on the healthcare system, supply chain. We heard a few other examples like that. But again, a little more consensus here on what people have concerns about for the next year. What, if any, changes has your organization made to office space and travel or in-person gatherings policies due to the Omicron surge? On the left side, you'll see some groupings around only when the client requests travel, or if it's client critical, approval is required by management for any work-related travel. In-office work is voluntary, or decreasing office size and footprint size, not having office space, or keeping meetings remote for now. I mentioned this upper right one, renovating buildings or space to be more accommodating to the hybrid model, et cetera. So these are some of the examples that people gave that rose to the top. And that is the basics of the poll that we put in the field last week. So I hope that some of you have had some opportunity to throw in some Q&A. And as you think about that, if you have any, Dennis, I'll toss to you kind of you made one comment earlier, but in general, taken all together, what are some things that stood out to you as you reviewed the results?
Yeah, well, you identified some of them, Brooks. I did think it was interesting, and I love your piece about people don't like Congress, but they like their own congressperson. The fact that their perception is that their own organization, more of those organizations are doing great, or bigger percentage, as opposed to North Carolina's technology scene writ large. Some of that may just be not knowing what everybody else is doing and kind of guessing. You have some of that happens in other elements of this survey. One of the things that made me a little squirmy was the slide about the innovation ecosystem and the entrepreneurial piece, and having as much pink. Again, I don't want to do gap analysis here. The blue and the dark blue were pretty darn good in both of those, but there seemed to be more pink than we probably should have in the midst of the accelerating techno-industrial revolution. And it just means that, what do we need to do to strengthen our ecosystem? And again, you made a couple of comments that, I think there's always room for improvement.
There certainly is. In fact, I'll just put a plug in here for a spot on our website that our audience might like to go check out. If you go to nctech.org/research, pretty sure that's how it would read, you'll find that we have 3 publications, one of which is brand new. We just launched in December a Tech Innovation Index, and that will be an annual release in the later part of the year, probably more like September actually going forward. And it takes the 100 top metros in America, which include a handful in North Carolina. It adds another 5 or so from North Carolina that don't make the top 100, so that most of the major North Carolina metros are included, and compares, ranks all those metros with respect to the demand for tech talent, the availability of tech talent, and then innovation generally. And we certainly have some areas that do very well in those rankings. So I would encourage everybody to take a look at that if you haven't already. We did a release about it, so you might have seen some reference to that. In that same area, we have a monthly IT job trends report. And this is where we partner with Gartner and use a tool of theirs that gives you a snapshot of the most recent month's job openings in North Carolina, tech job openings. And it has some things on there like top 10 occupations that were in demand, top 10 certifications or skills that were in demand. We do all 15 of North Carolina's metros and show how they're doing in terms of same period last year for tech hiring or tech availability. And then overall availability of tech jobs with a 13-month bar chart. So you can see, for example, when we released in January, we released December's numbers. So December of this past year, all the way back to December of the previous year. And you can see trends there. And what we normally see is in the fourth quarter, there's a dip in hiring. It's holiday season. Companies tend to slow down their hiring a bit. And then first quarter, it picks back up. Well, because of COVID and sort of the roaring out of COVID that the economy did, the last quarter actually had some of the highest readings we've ever seen. There was a bit of a dip in December, but it wasn't much, and it still ranked among the top for the year. So it'll be interesting to see if the usual cycles continue here in 2022. We'll be releasing in the later part of each month the previous month's numbers. So stay tuned for the February release of January's data, and we'll see how we're doing on that. And the last of the 3 items is our North Carolina State of Technology Industry Report, NC STIR. We launched that about 7 or 8 years ago. We commissioned this study. It compares North Carolina to all the states in a wide array of metrics that together paint a picture of how strong North Carolina is in having a tech-friendly state, a tech-friendly ecosystem, and ranks us in a variety of ways. It is not a sugar-coated report. We have all the rankings, whether we're strong or whether we have room to improve. And that's typically released in late January at our annual Outlook for Tech conference, which is our lead kickoff statewide annual event. And thanks to Omicron, we moved that. So it's going to be on March the 4th. I would encourage you to go to nctech.org/outlook. Check out the lineup. It's a great lineup of speakers and information. We'll be releasing that report there, and it will be on our website. You can look at the previous editions at ncstir.com. There is a dedicated website for that report. So the 21 report is there, but the 22 report will be there very soon. And for this quarterly poll, we'll do it in the beginning of every quarter. So early in April, be on the lookout for another round of polling. and we will have one of these webinars to share with you the results. Everyone who's registered for today will receive, as I said earlier, an email with links to all of this. You're welcome to share that widely. We encourage it. And also a reminder, these sessions we're making open to the public. Anyone can register for these on a complimentary basis. And in the future, if you're tuning in right now, if you can't listen in live, again, remember you will get an email with the video and the results afterward just by registering. So be sure to do that each time, even if your schedule doesn't permit it. So with that, we're at the end of our time. Dennis, really want to thank you and Stearns Financial for supporting this effort again this year. Stay tuned for next quarter's poll, and we'll do a similar briefing with those results then. So with that, thank you everyone for joining us today, and have a great rest of your week.